my path anyway has to be in English. His can be in French or Portuguese or English or whatever. He can know so many languages. But I'm very happy to be here with Diego, by the way, a good friend of mine for many years now. And we actually evolved some of these ideas for Agile Brazil, but unfortunately some things happened and we weren't able to do it in Agile Brazil because he got stuck in Miami, a terrible place.
So, hi, my name is Diego. Eu vou falar em inglês para a gente poder ter uma fluência aqui também com o Joe e a gente está fazendo um chat, ok? Se você dúvida em português, vocês podem fazer, eu ajudo aqui. E se tiver palavras ou alguma coisa pode puxar, eu também ajudo para vocês, ok? So, I just said that I would work as a translator. Okay, yeah. He's starting to learn Portuguese. So I work at PagSeguro currently, and I met Joe in PagSeguro I think 4 years ago, almost 5 years, yeah, and got in colder. And we started this process inside PagSeguro together, and very good ideas coming from Joe, and we were able to try some new ideas inside PagSeguro itself. And the presentation that we are doing here was meant for Agile Brazil, but I think that how many Agile Meister or the kind of people we have here in the audience, please?
How many people write software?
And how many people write software?
Yeah. Okay, but some kind of tech, okay, quite a bit. So we added more technical, even though at Agile Brazil we had less numbers. So,
Yeah.
So we definitely can get more technical. No problem there.
Exactly.
So generally when you think microservices and agility, usually it's kind of an opposing thing. Why are you talking about technology with agility? And PagSeguro has a great story over the past 4 to 5 years, at least when I was there, and even at that time not even doing it. And we want to kind of tell that. But we do have a little bit of disclaimer. Hey, look, just because maybe we have a couple opinions, don't hold PagSeguro or other people responsible for that. And also, we're critically thinking human beings. I might learn and adapt, so don't hold me forever to something I say. You might help teach me something so I can change my mind at any time as I learn, right? That's part of, I should remain teachable with that. So I want to start off with a story. And this is a made-up story, in a way. It's a success story because a lot of times I think the stories are good ways of grabbing me. And so this story, it started like maybe, I'll use Diego as an example. You know, Diego had this cool idea. You know, and Diego's going on with this idea and he says, hey, Joe, I got this great idea. Let's try to do this thing. Let's just build it. So we start pairing up and Diego's part-time on the weekends and all that. We start constructing and building this thing and wow, we build it. And this thing takes off, and it's better than anything we could ever imagine. Diego had a great idea, in fact. In fact, it was not an MVP. It was an MVP. Minimum awesome product. This was so cool, it went viral all across the internet. Next thing you know, it was so successful. It was beyond anything that Diego or I could imagine. We just wanted to build a cool thing. And it took off. And in fact, we had to quit our jobs. You know, we got some investment, started a lean startup, hired all our friends. But that wasn't enough. This was growing so much we had to start hiring a lot of other people. A good problem to have. But with that came many challenges. You know, and these challenges might be like what this guy had, but we weren't influencing presidential elections or anything like that. But we had a lot of other types of challenges. The system was growing rapidly. Many new customers, our teams were growing rapidly. How could we deal with these challenges? We were doing, you know, we started off doing the best thing we could with what we had. We were like a lean startup, doing a lot of smart practices. And we even, as we grew our teams, we even brought a lot of good agile practices in, trying to do the best technologies and clean code. But lo and behold, the system just kept growing to, you know, because all the new features and constantly changing and not enough time to really deal with it, that, you know, the monolith, which was being very successful helping us, it was having trouble continually to sustain it. We were still growing rapidly, but we were having a challenge. How can we deal with this? And in fact, if you're not careful, you can end up with something that we call big ball of mud, that something I guess I'm best known for, which is scary in a way, but me and Brian Foote a long time ago published, if you don't deal with this, and if you get too much technical debt, your system can get so you can no longer adapt and be as agile and evolve as you want to. So how can we stay lean and agile?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because this history here looks a lot of what we had at PagSeguro. We are working in the payment system, and we grew a lot in the last years. We just double each year, so we have a lot of problems. This actually is my boss.
The guy?
Yeah.
And this is actually one of the lead technical people in the lead business. So how can we keep the business side growing, and they're happy and getting along, and we continue to grow the business? And so even though this was a made-up story, it's not completely made up either. This is not at all.
Yeah.
So maybe you tell a little bit about, maybe you give a little bit of history how PagSeguro fits into this story.
And as I said, PagSeguro is a payment, SaaS payment provider here in Brazil. I think you have read, you've seen some of our POS. It's the most common to see today, but we have a very long history. We came from 2006, and we started as a portal, internet service provider using online channels. And we started growing, and near 2013, we started to try a movement to the physical world. Coming out from the web world to physical world, it was the first try. We got some very good numbers, but I think didn't start to grow the way that it got lately. And when we launched the Yoder, was the first huge growing point that we had, and the product people was just crazy to put new features in the street, to put new features in production, to change the system, and you need to have a lot of balance, because if you freeze that growing moment, like, hey guys, wait a year or wait 6 months that I work in that amazing architecture, you might lose that opportunity, the growing opportunity, because you are very in a hotspot moment. So it was kind of a turning point for us. And we
started growing rapidly at that point, right? That's when you more than double or quadruple per year with business, and the team started growing.
Yeah, I got in the company in the year 2013, 5 years now. We have 12 teams, and in the next year it's more than double, and more than double, and more than double. So the team, we have very huge,
over 120 or something like that now, right? A huge growth from those 5 years.
And we did our IPO here in January last year, and we were one of the biggest, the second biggest IPO done in New York. So we are now over company.
Much better than you even expected, right?
Yeah,
with the IPO. Exceeded expectations because of some of the success of it.
And this is kind of the problem that you was talking about, because you have to grow to have new clients, and you need to put new features in production, and maybe you have that big kind of mud that you just had. And that's kind of a problem looking from the technical perspective. But for the business, it was the thing that helped you to get there, you know. Like
right. A good problem to have, right?
Problem to have.
Because I remember coming right around this time, around 2014, 15.
Yeah.
In fact, that's why they brought me in is, well, what should we do with this? And I'm known for refactoring and big ball of mud, how to make code better. That's where I come from, my history.
Yeah.
And we started looking at analysis, what steps can we make? And I know early on it's more than just the architecture. We even had to look at the way you prioritize and bring things in.
There is a very strong cultural part in how you get your system going well in production, you know? Like, if if you have the wrong culture, maybe you sacrifice everything to get the features in production. But you need to work with the product people and the managers and try to find out what's the minimum viable product. How can you architect your system to have your cake and eat it too?
Yeah, cake and eat it too.
So we had this very big system. More than 1 million lines of code. The last time we saw was 3 million lines of code. If you put it together with JavaScript and HTML.
In fact, when I got there, this was the PagSeguro system.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what is the PagSeguro? Well, it's this.
Yeah.
And it's like, so let's try to figure out what it does and break it down. But it was being very successful. But it was this big thing.
What was holding us down, because when you have such a huge hawk, it's very difficult to move, very difficult to make change, so you need to start something. And we started circa 2014 or something like that, work out in the breaking the monolithic system because we need to reach a critical point.
I think you even had a process for this, right?
Yeah, the delivery process.
In fact, you would even have something you called, I think this mega framework scaling. It was a paper even submitted and accepted at one of the main Agile conferences. And tell about the difficulties of this.
It was applying Agile methodology to a very huge system. We had 4 different development groups, one in each color. And each group there were, 8 to, let's say 10 development teams. So the development teams started making changes in their break, and we were not using Git at the time. It was all done in SEN. And given a certain day, one team goes to put their changes in production, and we do a release in a certain week. And after that, a second group of teams go now to production and does delivery. And afterward, another team go there and put things in production. And then another team. So our release process, even using Scrum and Agile, was once a week. And once a week, a group of teams put change in production.
That means that individual teams, 1/4 of the teams could only release once a month.
Yeah.
So you would work on 3-week sprints, and then you would have an integration hell week trying to get everything back in, because what the other 3/4 of the teams have done in the meantime, in dealing with some of that headaches and stuff. It was still keeping things moving, but you couldn't be as agile and lean as you wanted, even though we were trying to do some of the best known practices and scale up as we were going.
And you might dream about the merge problems that we had, because
or maybe have nightmares.
Yeah, not dreaming, but nightmares. It was kind of like that. Because if this line law doesn't take change from the production for the trunk in a regular basis, it will just get changed from 2 different groups of teams, and the merge was just crazy. And hey man, I don't know who here have worked with SEN, but doing this kind of stuff in SEN wasn't easy.
Quite a headache.
Well, man, and we changed.
But they were still being successful, but they were just not able to continue to sustain and grow. They were having trouble. They were still growing, but it was difficult, so they had to change.
Yeah.
They had to make a change.
So, then we started to the saída do monolito, the breaking of the monolith system. This is very nice image, you know.
Yeah.
And it was a process that we started.
It looks pretty. It was difficult to change.
I like to might look pretty. So it was a work that we started to do to slice this big system. And the first time we were not concerned too much about microservices at all. We just saw a very visible slicing point in that huge monolithic system, in that big repository. And we just did a very linear slice. And that was very interesting because it generated us not only knowledge, but also tooling for the next part of breaking these systems.
So then we could, in fact, we started looking at, are there different domain parts we can on the next, are there even domain parts we could start cracking?
Yeah, and we learned to define a little better these domains. Because when you learn or see something about DDD, and you start to understanding about the domain, the domain separation and the point that where it's touched, when you have that kind of knowledge, you can do better systems, you know. But this code base had more than 10 years of age. So I think the developers that was doing change during that time wasn't that aware of this kind of modularization. But we can see very easy parts inside of this big system starting to break more smart, in a more smart way.
In fact, some pieces were easy, but some pieces were highly entangled. But they were core. They were so important. The transactions and other stuff going on, and high risk if you don't break it out properly.
Yeah. And that's very good strategy to make these evolutional steps. Like we didn't got to microservices directly. We had something like that we called Microservices. That was not small, but it was smaller than what we had. We did some slicing here and there. And also, and again, it teaches us a lot of things, you know, like how to break and where to cut your domain and how to cut your domain.
So they were constantly learning as you went through this process, right? This helped you learn a lot. And you even had some wins with this, but still you had to go further with it, right?
And there's a problem that happens when you have this kind of architectural structure with microservices, because the communication override that you have in your system now are a lot higher. Before, everything was running inside the JVM with local calls. Now we have the process of communication going in magnitudes over what you had before. And how does that impact your system? And do you have the tooling necessary to have a good communication? Will all the communication going to be synchronous communication, or is it going to be asynchronous communication? And you have a lot of things that you don't know. And you don't even know what to look for to take a decision in which direction you are going.
So you're constantly having to do spikes and learn and experiment, right?
Exactly.
So ultimately, you reach a point where you're saying, okay, we're starting to see that maybe going to these smaller services, the separation is getting us a big win. And about this time too, of course, then there was the hype of microservices. So we got to at least check it out. And there was a kind of a thought that maybe we could do something like what Martin Fowler talked about. And before microservices in 2005, he called it the Strangler application. And that's, at that time, service-oriented architecture was growing a lot. And it was like, we're going to create our system around the core system, but rather than adding to the mess, we're going to start creating new things outside of it, strangling the old system, maybe still having some value in the middle, just like these trees are obviously in the Amazon, but also I think this picture is from Australia. They have a very similar thing that goes on where it strangles, but it gets life out of the core. So out of the monolith still had some value, but you could start adding new features or pulling out some macro pieces and rewriting them from some microservices. So we want to go a little bit through the process. If you
we applied this kind of pattern to break applications, and we are at 4 years in this process of breaking our big system. Here it is still very core, but we have something very interesting today. And we got to a place where we were able to have a lot of microservices, 400 something or something less than so, or something near that.
Yeah, you'll see that a little bit later. But they have, I mean, 3 years ago they had 0. Now they have quite a few hundred.
Yeah.
And they have more than twice as much code in microservices in the monolith. And that's part of how they've been able to evolve. But it didn't happen overnight. There was an evolutionary process.
Yeah, and a very hard work of a team, of a lot of developers, and I don't know if some PagSeguro people here, I've been seeing some here and there. But it was very hard work done by the PagSeguro team. We learned a lot. We did some mistakes here and there. We did some things right here and there. So as Joey said, it's a learning process, you know. And what we saw is that the communication overhead that we have in using microservice is something real. You need to understand the impact of doing a remote call. That's very different of doing a local call. And it's important to understand if you get out from this presentation with the idea that I will break the system in the enterprise that work to do microservices application. As I said before, you need to have some sizing to be good to pay the price that microservices will ask you for.
Right. I mean, what if there's 5 of us? What do we do? Have 5 microservices?
That's the number.
15. Okay, I like that number. But I mean, there's trade-offs because you're building a distributed system. So if the system is not changing fast and not evolving and growing, even if you look at Chris Richardson, who just put a book out on microservices architecture patterns, he has the first pattern is monolith versus microservice. Before microservices, we didn't have the word monolith. We just called it the system, and we tried to do good layering, other kind of good patterns with that. So monolith is not necessarily a bad thing, but if it starts growing and changing, like with some of the things, you have to have, you don't really get the benefits. The cost of microservices can be greater. If we have 50,000 lines of code, why just, should I have 100 and divide that and have that many lines in microservice or what?
And that's, I like this technical world because you can measure things and have precise drivers for changes that you're going to do in your system. But one important part,
I think something, you definitely need the culture. If you're going to be successful, something that I think you learn, the agile culture and the architecture is evolving. To be successful, you learn a lot. The history, right?
And one important part that we asked how many microservices, what's the size of the microservices? That's a thing that you learn, and that's not that mathematical that I would like it to be. You will not have a formula where you just know the inputs and see what's the output, a Boolean output, for example. I have 3 values that I put in the function, and I receive a Boolean value telling me if I need to have microservices or not. So it's not a linear function. It's something that's a bad thing. That's not a good thing. It's something that comes from your inside. You understand that where is the place that you cut. You understanding the trade-offs.
Yeah, there's always trade-offs.
There are always.
Which we'll see on the next thing here. Because on one hand, you get the quicker and flexible deployment, and you get to experiment around with different technologies. They have many. I mean, mostly Java, but they have Kotlin, they have Go, they have Python. I think you have Scala.
Too.
Yeah, many different database technologies. They can experiment. That's hard with a monolith. You're kind of stuck, and it's hard to change. And they're smaller and more modular. Also, minimal downtime, easier to scale out. So there's all these others are more manageable. But there's a cost with it too. You have a distributed system, distributed databases. How do we sync all that? And there's some well-known patterns that help with that. But these are the complexities. Well-known computer science problems from a long time ago. Yeah. But it makes things a little bit more difficult. And if you don't have a fast-growing system with a lot of things going on, you may not get the benefits of that. You've got to watch out for, microservice for a function? You could do that. A lot of chatting, that's kind of stupid, right? But you could write a microservice for every function, you know, and it may have more memory. And then you have to make sure to have the culture and things set up for that.
Yeah, and taking care of one system running production It's very different than take care of 100 systems running in production. And we were just talking about that. That's this probability, you know? Like if you have a chance of a 3% chance of something goes wrong, if your number is bigger, 3% is something that you will see.
And what if it's only 1% per microservice? Well, it's not. You have to add things up and across, and so the probability can go much higher that something goes wrong. So you have to really have good practices. So there's important considerations that we want to talk about with this. And so one thing we want to talk about, what are some strategies that you should do to be successful? And so one thing we started off with is, we use a strangler pattern. Now, Mark Fowler talked about the strangler application, but the strangler pattern, rather than completely rewriting this, what we did was we could add new services, sometimes pulling out little pieces, but any kind of new thing that we add, we're going to add as a microservice. And you can't even use some different proxies or adapters or other things in the facade type here, where things come along and as far as they know, your old clients and new clients get more like a standard API, and things can kind of evolve independently. You can kind of protect things from changing, and that way you can evolve over time more to the microservices and ultimately make this go away. So that was one of the challenges early on, is how can we add new things and protect from change?
And it might look something very different to get, but this struggle of facade might be this Nginx proxies over your APIs, doing some kind of smart checking and turning to the left or to the right, giving some parameters. So it's very doable, you know, like it's possible to break your system, change the wings of the plane flying, you know. So as other aviões quando ele voa, né?
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah.
But yeah, in a sense, completely rewriting the system and taking it down or it was impossible to catch up because requirements were happening so fast. So they really had to keep the plane flying, so to speak, as they were changing the engines and wings and stuff, keeping it going, and then ultimately, in fact, they're not completely here yet. There's still some monolith stuff that's providing some value. So that was one thing, part of what they're doing. But some of that sometimes says to start small, take baby steps. We had the macro first, then micro maybe. And model around, but you have to do other things. You have to think about how big should they be. Should they be this small chatty thing, or maybe they should be these bigger type components, And so maybe if you could share a little bit, Diego, about how were you guys able to figure out some of the right size microservices?
Yeah, we got to a point that there is PagSeguro that we have very small microservices doing really one small little thing, but we have some services that we accept to be a little bigger, and that's the part that I said you will not have a function that will give you where to split and where to cut. Because it involves, for example, what is the availability requirements for your system? Are the system being developed locally or with different things in different areas? Is it a very high throughput system? What's the change requirement? So you have to think in a lot of combinations of factors. Does these two different domains, do they change together or not? Because the release will be together. So there's this process where you get to the point you don't care too much about the naming microservice itself, but you're starting to care the modularization in the modularization problem. And when you see that your module is in a sense that you are able to evolve and to change it easy and to onboarding new people and to meet availability requirements. So maybe you are in the right.
So you're trying to find the gems, the right things around the business, right? How to find within the business domain. So those are some of the challenges, because you got to watch out. Size is key. You don't want to be too small. You end up with a lot of chattiness, network overhead, and other challenges. But you don't want something too big either. You don't want the like my Monday coffee, being like a monolith or whatever. Because if it gets, I tend to err on a little bit larger than too small. because you can always decompose those to some microservices, but you don't want to be too big, because if you're not careful, you end up, that's what you got to really watch out for with that. And so, to follow up with something that Diego was talking about, something that's key is, how do you actually find the right size, and you want to decompose. Fortunately, this person here, Chris Richardson, has a couple cool patterns that you can kind of consider. One is he talks about decomposing by business capability. So there around the business domain, you can think, for example, of an online store. We might think of a product catalog, or order management, inventory management. And then we can create our microservices based around that. Now notice some of these microservices may ultimately even have other supporting microservices around the domain as you learn and doing some things, and that's exactly what, if you started working at PagSeguro and started looking at some of their systems, you would see that as well. That's why things are kind of growing. Now one of his other patterns, you can decompose by the subdomain. And this is actually very similar to when you think of Eric Evans' domain-driven design type concept that Diego mentioned earlier. So here you can think of, within the domain of online store, the subdomain could be both order management and a subdomain of inventory management, and you find the bounded context. And so that thinking about that domain can help you decide on how to do that. And that can give you a good win on not only getting the size, but modeling around the business, and then you can even form teams around that. And there's not a magic number, like should it be 100 lines of code or 10,000 lines of code. It depends, once again, on the domain.
Yeah, and it's very, I have that, I usually talk about an example to evaluate how good your microservice or your architecture as a whole is. And the example that I bring is, suppose that you have a system that works with products, they sell products, they produce and sell products. Maybe for the inventory system, having a product inside the store is a bad thing, because it will it's using a space, and it take this product out of the store as fast as it can, because it's a problem to have a product in the store. But for other part of the company, have a product in the store, you are a hitcher. It's good to have a product in the store, because you are a hitcher company. You have some value in your store. And how can you handle these two different aspects of a product in your system? Do you have, is your product domain being well used, given these characteristics of the system? Or do you have a flat data structure that you call product, but you are not using these different views of that?
Very hard to adapt to different views of product, right? So you have to, and so do we have different microservices for every product, or? And a lot depends on the business domain. So you have to, that's where you have to really, you can use domain-driven design and other techniques to help with that. Now another big challenge that you have is, you've got to watch out for coupling and dependencies between microservices. Because now we have to test, and so I'm testing my microservice, but it's got a lot of dependencies on these others, and there's many challenges, plus there's a lot of network traffic, and how do I ensure I haven't broken something when I release it? And so maybe you could share some of the issues from some of the potential microservices. These are, by the way, these are a lot of this is how many microservices
it's a real base
for PagSeguro.
Yeah, for a production system.
You can see there's a lot of connections there, and if you're not careful, I mean, sometimes there's still some tied up things that you have to be concerned about.
Yeah.
So what are some strategies that you guys have thought about for dealing with some of these challenges with the connections?
Yeah, the connections part is very difficult, because we have some graph going on, some data that you have, and that data might have some, as I said, gravity. A lot of systems might starting to call that part that wasn't breaking Microservices yet. So it's an ongoing problem that we have, and we don't have the final answer for this question, but that's a process that we are learning. And in the middle here, we have the monolithic system that we started to break 4 years ago.
But it's still providing value.
Yeah,
It's still providing value.
Yeah.
But there's a lot. I mean, you can have more than twice as much code with all the other microservices now. But it still needs some, and you have to sync things up, so you have challenges. But fortunately, there's some well-known patterns that can help with that.
Yeah.
For example, one architecture pattern that me and Rebecca Wurzbrock wrote for how to keep your architecture clean. You can think of some of those items. Like we put a rug at the front door. You know, if somebody's coming in your house, take off your shoes before you get in. In other words, maybe you have some internal pieces that need to be protected. And maybe even have some microservices that need to be protected. You can actually, what you can do is use some well-known patterns, such as an adapter, proxy facade, or whatever. And this is almost, in a sense, you could think of Eric Evans' anti-corruption layer. It's very similar to what Eric in his domain-driven design talks about. We're trying to protect, generally you're trying to protect the internal components from maybe a lot of clients and customers and how they vary, and you don't want to entangle all your code with that. So you could use this anti-corruption, this layer in here. And this can get a little bit muddy, but it protects these two things so they stay clean.
Yes, and this kind of pattern we apply in parts of the system. For example, lately we were changing a concept that we had inside called user ID. We had this ID flowing through the system, but now we want to have the customer ID. That's something different than the user ID. So we need to do this kind of protection for the new ID or the new domain, and to make that new domain be the front for the new system, protecting from the user ID starting to spread in new microservices, for example, thing that we're doing right now.
So, like when Eric Evans, if you look at how he's talking, is you're trying to deal with this. Usually, when Eric talked about it, his anti-corruption layer was really trying to protect this system from external. But actually, you could even think of protecting both systems from each other. So this could be potentially the monolith, and you're even protecting the monolith from changes, so it doesn't keep having to get entangled. And so what you could do is have some different levels of a layer here, a facade, or some different things that you're going through. And you can even have some of your microservices as they're evolving. If they're going to talk to the monolith, they don't talk directly, so any ugly glue code doesn't have to be added to the monolith. It can be added to this layer, keeping this at least not getting worse. Maybe it's not getting any better, but at least it's not getting worse. And then these can evolve more cleanly the way you want to without having to worry. As far as they know, they're talking to some kind of macro surface here or whatever for some type of calls. And you may even you could use this anti-corruption layer to protect even some of the entanglements between microservices, groupings of different domains and subdomains, using some of that.
We were breaking part of a system, I think 2 years ago, and we started to have some new microservices outside with a model different of what we had in the modeling system. And we did a piece of code that we called the meat processor, transformador de carne, the meat processor, that does exactly what Joe is saying. It keeps in sync the new view that we had for that part of the system with the old view during the transition. So it goes both ways. If you change in the old system, it will sync back to the new system with the new model. And if you change in the new model, it will go in backwards and change again the old system. So it's a two-way flow.
And most of the time, I mean, I do have some friends at other companies that might start a new project knowing they're changing so much. They start off writing microservice architecture because they know they're, like I have some friends at New Bank doing that and other things. But most of the time, most people are starting with a monolith and you're evolving, so there's some good patterns. But even if you're starting clean without the monolith, this anti-corruption layer can be a good thing to use around your bounded context, around your domain to help as your different domains evolve from limiting coupling where they can evolve more independently, not messing things up. So obviously this was said early on, if you really want to be successful, you need the right culture. And having DevOps and things like that is key for that. And so we want to talk a little bit about DevOps. And one of the cool things that I like, if you really look at the first principle behind the Agile Manifesto, they talk about the highest priority. Obviously, is to satisfy the customer, but they say early and continuous delivery. And so that's really, even though continuous is a pretty strong word in English anyway, I'm not sure how it translates in Portuguese, but continuous means all the time. It's really not it's not like there's a constant stream, but still a lot of regular deliveries of something valuable. If we're working on something as a team, at any time you're the customer, if you find value in that, we should release it to you right there. You know, maybe even we've only added a little bit, but that little bit is good value. We can put that into production right away. And so having this DevOps culture is, to me, key, but to be successful, it's all about the pipeline. You need a quality pipeline. And so here's kind of an example I had where at the bare minimum, this is just a minimum pipeline. This isn't, at the bare minimum, you're going to have to get the code and build it and stuff. I hope you're doing at least some testing, you know, before you put things out there in production. But generally, you might want to have some stage releases, code quality, health tests. And in fact, I think we found that there's a lot more that we have to go through. So maybe you could kind of share some of these different types of things that you've had to deal with.
And again, we are starting to talk about volume. You know, you had one big system, now you have 20, now you have 100. And to really handle the process, you need to have very good pipelines. It's a sample pipeline that we have in some projects there, where we do sonar check, fortify, we do one part of the release to put the new version in our architecture. We do deploy to QA, to database, and also to production. And all of that was automated. Even the database change was automated. So we have some delivery in production. And even after delivering to production, we have a health check process in production that might stop the delivery in that area, that data center.
Could be other microservices you were dependent upon having some consistency problems or whatever.
Validation.
I mean, this whole thing, if you really think of it, it's almost like a quality filter. You think of pipes and filters, you can think of this as like a pipe and filter in a system in a way. And part of your filtering on certain quality checks. Let's make sure that the code is still meeting the minimum unit test, integration test, but also are there certain sonar checks? Maybe some of the other types of architectural checks find that there may be possible null exceptions or what, depending on which language you're using. And what about security? We might want to do some security in other checks. But there's still some other types of qualities we want to make sure when we do this, and we have maybe even some ways of backing up and recovering, but automation is key. If you really want to be able to be successful, you have to automate this type of stuff. And I love this quote by Bill Gates. Bill Gates, I'll read the quote. It says, the first rule of any technology used in business is that automation applied to an efficient operation will magnify the efficiency. But the second is, if you got a problem, it's also going to magnify the problem, right? So, and that's good. We want to be able to notice right away if we have a problem and become parent of it before it affects our business and other things. So things that are tedious, error-prone, repetitive, you know, maybe code smell detection, architectural conformance, quality metrics, security, any types of things, we automate this as much as we can.
And if you automate and you have a problem, you will fix the problem, the automation, that problem will never happen again.
Yeah.
You might have new problems, but then you automate the checks and go on. So
that's like if you have a bug, you write a test to make sure it's automated test. Yeah, good point. Also, visibility is key, and in fact, Diego is key on some of this right now in PagSeguro. That's a lot of his responsibility now, kind of evolving, but we can't fix what we can't see. So visibility is important for the team, but it's also important to watch what's happening in operations. So you might have some good stories you want to share there.
Like as I said before, now you have a problem with volume. When you had one system, you had one log to look for problems. If you have 10 systems, you have 10 places that you need to log. And imagine going 100 systems. So having tooling is very, very, very important. I would say again, very, very, very important. And things like Kubernetes and technologies like that from AWS help you to manage your fleet of servers, or better, your fleet of microservices. So you need to have tooling for monitoring, for orchestration, and so on. Otherwise, you go crazy. Okay.
Right. And even the teams are responsible for actually not only doing the development, but also doing the releasing. And they have to have a lot of monitoring support, not only through the Jenkins pipeline, but other things. And the nice thing is this fits well into the agile transparency, visibility sharing, and we're bridging the gap between the business and technology. I mean, some of this visibility is even making transparent to the business people as well, you know? And so you may even have some technical debt. You have to tie that into the business values. So just to kind of end and bring things back, is we started off talking about microservices and agility. Generally, most agile people would say, oh, why are you talking about technology and being agile? Well, actually, any decision we make, not only in the teams and how we collaborate, that's important, and having good people, but our technology decisions, as part of the PagSeguro story, definitely influenced how lean and agile. I want to show how you got there. But first, let me tell you how I think of agile. Agile is not like a silver bullet. Agile is more of a mindset. You have ideas, you're building things, you know, ultimately implementing, but you need to be constantly watching and learning and making things visible and learn and adapt. Most people miss this last part when they're doing agile is we need to be looking not only at this, maybe a technical debt, but what teams are doing, problems happen, and the business. Now, most agile teams are really good at looking at how fast are we going, but are we going the right direction? Are we even building the right thing? I can go real fast to a ball of mud. So we need to kind of focus from that perspective. And so I always look at, rather than blindly doing agile, because doing says there's only one truth and one way. Being agile is like if you're a musician, you're constantly experimenting and trying and learning new things. Same way with development. Linda Rising calls this the agile mindset. And so agile isn't blindly following the process, it's kind of this constant improvement. And this guy, very famous guy, he's actually the second adopter of Scrum, wrote the first Scrum book and stuff with Jeff Sutherland back in, started in the 90s, the first patterns, and they put their book out in 2000. He was quoted last year, a really good quote on it. And this guy done enterprise, agile, all kinds of stuff. He says, agile does not cure incompetence. You can coach teams to be more engaged and collaborative, but no agile framework, method, or mindset can save you from blatant failure if your development team is incompetent in basic engineering practices. So technical excellence is a must. So to really be, agile helps with the people, but part of agile says I have to do what adds value from that. So we really have to mix not only the people skills, but the technical skills as well. That's a key important thing that we do. So just to kind of end up, why don't you kind of give a story of how we evolved and where you're at today?
Yeah.
Just to end up.
So we started telling that PagSeguro do a very big release once a week, and it was circa 4 years ago. And today we have very different realities. So this is our pay attention yesterday, and I will help you to read this kind of slide. There was a day that in the last fall,
One day.
that we did a total of 607 different services to deliver to production.
So 157 different services released
In one day.
In one day, different.
Yeah, different services. Here, I don't know exactly what the number is. A group of services did 2 releases.
So some services maybe had to release twice, maybe something wasn't right, or you were able to add some kind of new thing quickly, but it added value, you could put it out there twice.
So we got to look for a place where we did a very big release.
Before. I mean, that's talk about agility and being able to experiment, not only with different languages and other stuff, you're constantly able to kind of sustain what's going
What
on.
features in production are easy and with certain guarantees that you didn't broken the whole system because you changed this as a small part.
Yeah. And experimenting with new things for different customers, maybe doing preliminary releases. And in fact, I really like the quote that Diego has here, this is from Diego, not from me. You might have an Agile Elephant, which is kind of what they had before, right?
Yeah.
And that gave them some win, but they couldn't sustain it because when their market needs grew beyond this, they had to really kind of evolve to more like the Agile Cat. So I like that. So, by the way, this is not only unique to PagSeguro. Some of these other small companies have been doing this as well. You know, such as Twitter or eBay or Amazon. They went through a similar evolutionary process. So this is a common type theme that goes on. If you do have a monolith, if you start off with microservices, that's fine. Still, some of these ideas can help you, like finding the right size, using domain-driven design, how to protect things that change from not change with an anti-corruption layer. But if you have a monolith, there's still some other types of patterns that can help as you evolve with that. So anyway, it's not a silver bullet. You still have to think about things, and what do you value? What do your teams value? So it's definitely been our pleasure to be here. We have a couple of quotes, which this came from our big ball of mud paper. Hey, if you think good architecture is expensive, try bad architecture. You know?
Yeah, and I like to say that with architecture and the guys who have solid principles, you don't need anything else. Partners and everything will arise. So yeah, I like to do very good architecture and thinking problems.
So get into good practices, good mindset, continuous learning. So we have a few minutes for questions, but mutual regard, Joe. Thank you very much for suffering in English with this, and thank you, Diego, for the time.
Very good.
We do have at least 5 minutes, I guess, if people want to have a few questions, or and you can ask in Portuguese too.
Yeah, no problem. Don't mind to ask in Portuguese.
Vou perguntar em português, senão todo mundo entende. Eu quero saber um pouco sobre um problema que eu tenho agora, que é, na verdade, a gente está fazendo essa parte de quebrar o monolito e a gente tem algumas informações que dependem tanto do monolito quanto do nosso microserviço. Aí eu queria saber entender se a gente realmente reproduz essa informação nos dois, porque aí a gente teria que cuidar de questões de balanceamento de dados e etc., que um tem e o outro pode não ter, ou se a gente faria que seria o responsável, como se fosse um master, né, e para o outro microserviço obter a informação dele.
I will summarize the question in English just for the YouTube too. He has a data that is stored in a database, but the two system needs the data. The first one and the microservice one. I will speak in English, okay, for the fold, and I'll try to summarize in Portuguese. We had that kind of problem at PagSeguro, and you need to understand what facet of the data you need, because maybe for part of your system you need 3 to 5 fields, and in the other system you need 2 or 3 different fields. Maybe some of those fields might overlap, some other not, and if that's the case, maybe replicating the data might be the thing. What we had was another case. We had this structure made of 5 or 6 different tables, and we need that information in another part of the systems, in the microservices. And when we started to going a little deeper, we saw that we didn't need the 5 tables. We need some different view of the table, different view that
you learned.
Yeah,
You were going through the process, you learned, and that's the key thing is, that's more that agile mindset.
Yeah.
Keep learning and constantly challenge and grow from that.
And if you make some mistakes in part of splitting the data, you might get in some trouble because like conflict the data. But doing things slowly will help you and understand this kind of the data facet. When I need to look from this side, not from this side. So things might look different.
So experiments and tests are key because it can cause consequences. Okay? Do we need to repeat Portuguese? We can if people want.
Summarize Portuguese or is it okay in English?
Other question, and you could just answer in Portuguese too. I'm fine with that. But another question.
No início, quando vocês começaram a migrar para o microserviço, você poderia dar algum exemplo de dificuldade que vocês tiveram com o trace? Por exemplo, a informação deveria entrar como microserviço, passar por 5 microserviços. Ela parou no meio. Como vocês conseguiam identificar o payload, como ele foi passando até chegar na onde ele quebrou? Que tipo de dificuldade vocês tiveram com isso daí para manter esse tipo de informação?
It's about troubleshooting, I'm speaking Portuguese now. Olha, cara, eu estou tentando lembrar aqui um caso que tenha sido icônico. Icônico no sentido de, caramba, foi trabalhoso pra caceta, a gente, se matou ali para resolver. Não estou lembrando de nenhum categórico agora. O que a gente tentou fazer foi um processo bem gradual, né? Vou dar um exemplo. A gente foi introduzir um microserviço em parte do sistema e a gente, durante uns 2 meses aproximadamente, fez com que o sistema antigo chamasse os 2 módulos, tanto o módulo velho quanto o módulo novo. E aí a gente conseguiu pegar problemas de comunicação nesse meio do caminho, coisas que dariam errado. E aí quando a gente chaveou para que o novo sistema entrasse em produção de verdade, ele já tinha rodado 1 mês e tanto ali os 2 em paralelo. Então isso reduziu muito questões de problema em produção. E como eu falei, a questão de ferramenta, a gente tem ferramentas para gestão de log, né? Então eu consigo pegar um log de vários sistemas distintos, colocar um Kibana da vida, a gente não usa o Kibana, a gente usa os pontos lá internamente. E aí você consegue minimamente ter uma visão de fora. Um ponto importante é que quando você for para o mundo de microserviço, eventualmente você está num mundo assíncrono. Você pode não ter escolhido isso, mas a coisa começa a ficar assíncrona. E aí uma estratégia boa é você fazer no seu sistema lógicas compensatórias, entendeu? Aí eu chamei aqui, chamei lá e não aconteceu. Em meia hora que é a sua janela, você tem que sair desfazendo tudo. Então, essa questão de troubleshoot é um pouco mais complexo.
Okay. Maybe we have time for another.
Um dos pontos negativos que vocês citaram sobre microserviços é o fato de que ele tem um overhead maior de memória, de CPU e de comunicação na rede. Eu queria saber se tem alguma técnica para mitigar esses problemas de overhead, de usar esse tipo de coisa, ou se é um problema que você tem que aceitar mesmo e comprar mais VM, esse tipo de coisa.
Ok. Eu vou em português para... I will in português to have a high throughput, okay? Olha, a chamada HTTP é diferente de um chamado na memória. Um comparativo é que se você fizer chamada local na memória, você vai 1 metro, se você chamada HTTP, você vai em Marte e volta, medida de tempo. Só que pode ser que aí você tem que trabalhar muito fortemente, se é um ponto sensível, um ponto crítico. A gente, na maioria das comunicações lá, acontece via REST. Então a gente tem, além da questão da chamada remota, o overhead do HTTP e HTTPS. Na média, a gente tem tentado encontrar chamadas otimizadas. Por exemplo, teve uma alteração que entrou há pouco tempo que ele chamava um microserviço uma chamada por vez. A gente percebeu que isso está tendo um impacto de performance. Então a gente começou a fazer um lote, chamar esse microserviço em lote. Então é bem você ficar atento, porque a mudança é significativa. E aí o principal problema para mim é quando você tem uma latência de rede. Meu amigo, latência de rede te mata. A gente tem que aplicar circuit breakers, timeouts bem definidos. É um ponto que você tem que ficar de olho.
Okay. One more? Do we have time for one more?
Okay. There.
Eu queria entender, no monolítico a gente usa sessão, né, para autenticação, etc. Eu queria saber se vocês pegaram algum problema para fazer a migração referente à segurança, autenticação do usuário, se usaram o AUF2 ou continuaram usando sessão, alguma coisa do tipo.
Um pouco de tudo. Você pode fazer coisas muito feias com o uso de cookie, que eu vou contar aqui que é muito feio. Mas você tem vários microserviços que usam o browser como sendo um mecanismo em comum. Então, o cookie ele pode te ajudar um pouco a se tratar essa questão de autenticação. E o ALF ajuda, sabe? Mas eu vou te falar que o modelo do ALF 2, que é o que a gente está usando lá, ele é bem genérico. Ele, na verdade, quando ele foi elaborado, teve uma discussão danada ali, teve até brigas lá no comitê e tal. Então, ele pode não ter medo de quebrar a regra, entendeu? Por exemplo, a gente fala muito de um ponto que eu carrego muito comigo, é a questão de normalização de banco de dados, né? Quando você sabe quando desnormalizar o seu banco de dados, é que você teve aquele momento, você fala, ops, eu vou desnormalizar porque aqui eu vou ter performance. Então essas regras também, de vez em quando, você pode ter uma licença poética ali para dar uma quebradinha e resolver esse problema. The last one.
Okay. Last question.
Boa noite, meu nome é Danilo. Gostaria de saber se vocês tiveram algum problema com integrações que vêm do microserviço, como se vocês mudassem um endpoint ou qualquer coisa de versões. Tipo, se algum outro microserviço fizesse integração e vocês mudaram um atributo que não retorna mais, como é que vocês notificam? Como é que tem essa versionamento de métodos deprecated?
Eu vou dar essa resposta para isso, vou encaixar um outro problema que a gente teve com a questão de microserviço, também que eu me veio a cabeça agora. É você tomar um cuidado com o versionamento da API interna, assim como você toma no versionamento de uma API pública. Então, invariavelmente você vai ter que manter mais de uma versão viva durante um tempo, até todos os clientes migrarem. Algum filho da mãe não vai querer migrar, você vai ter uma API velha lá durante um bom tempo. Só que como é dentro de casa, você pode brigar um pouco mais fácil. A gente chegou a ter problema sim com quebra de contrato. A gente subiu uma instância, uma área, um data center, tudo vermelho, pegando fogo, parou o processo de subir no segundo, o pessoal atuou, deu o rollback da instância e a gente conseguiu atuar muito rápido. E agora o que pode acontecer quando você está no processo de quebra do microserviço é porque, como eu falei, uma chamada local é uma chamada remota, né? Alguém já desenvolveu para JB aí, só para ter ideia? JB tá bom. Tem o contexto transacional, o dito contexto transacional lá do JB. E aí o que acontecia numa dessas alterações que a gente fez? Uma chamada local no servidor, um pequeno pedaço aqui dava um exception e ele acabava dando rollback em todo o contexto transacional. Quando a gente tirou aquele módulo de dentro do monolito e botou no serviço externo, a exception acontece lá daquele lado. O contexto transacional que a gente tinha que ter o rollback efetuado, não teve. E aí a gente teve um impacto significativo com esse problema, e esse é o tipo de problema que ele é um problema não temporal, sabe? Você, em alguns casos, você pode seguir e, até você pegar aquela questão da lógica que alterou, esse para mim é o pior desafio, é um dos maiores desafios quando você tem esse processo de quebra de monolito, de integração de serviço. Tudo bem?
Okay.
You're okay?
So I'm okay. I just want to end with this, if you don't mind.
Okay, go ahead.
I decided to put the nice picture up there again, because part of the story is sometimes a monolith, they can be very beautiful and providing a lot of value. And that's why part of our story is going through the cultural change, and it wasn't a bad thing. I mean, they got to where they're at today with this, but ultimately they reached a point where that ivory tower wasn't doing it anymore. You know, maybe we have the architect up on the ivory tower, it's got to be like this. But they ultimately, you had to rethink things and not only change the organization, the agile mindset, because they were doing some agile practices, but they had to completely adapt. From Scrum, there's a lot of Kanban going now, continuous delivery, and this adaptation. But as you continue to evolve, look at the story. I mean, based upon some of the evolution of not only the culture and but the architectural decisions, but still doing the best practices. They could have a worse problem with the microservice if they don't handle it correctly. But because of this, they've continued to grow rapidly, and you can see some of the releases they've done. That's an amazing story. So it's not like a silver bullet, there's always trade-offs, and you might have a nice monolith, but if you start reaching the point where it's having trouble, there are some decisions we can make that fits into the agile mindset that can be huge wins. So Vito Ricardo, thank you very much.